My family said I was too sensitive. Then I found out. They hid my inheritance for 7 years. I used to think I was born into the wrong family, but the truth is harsher. I was born into the right family. They just didn't want me. My name is Ethan. I'm 30 now, but this story begins when I was a quiet, awkward kid growing up in a loud, opinionated house. My dad ran a small construction company and believed the only acceptable emotions were anger and pride. My mother worked in real estate and thought appearances were everything, especially when it came to having the perfect family. My older brother Jason was exactly what they wanted. Athletic, charismatic, messy in a charming way. The golden child, I was not. I was the kid who asked too many questions, cried when the dog next door died, and liked reading instead of football. I wasn't soft. I just felt everything deeply. That was my original sin. At family dinners, Jason would crack crude jokes, spill soda, interrupt everyone. My parents laughed and called him full of life. I'd correct a date in something he said, and I'd get told not to be a know-it-all. If I brought home an A-, my mom would ask what happened to the other 10%. When Jason scraped by with C's, she'd say, "At least you passed." By age 12, I stopped showing them my report cards. The only person who treated me like I wasn't a problem to fix was my grandfather, my dad's dad. He lived alone after my grandmother passed and had this gentle, deliberate way about him. He didn't speak much, but when he did, you listened. Every Sunday, I'd bike to his house just to sit with him while he tinkered in the garage or made toast with far too much butter. He taught me how to change oil, how to fish, how to tell when someone's lying by the way they blink. He once said, "You don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to mean it." That line stayed with me. I never told anyone how much I loved him, not because I was ashamed, but because it felt like something sacred. Unlike with my parents, I never had to fight for his attention. I didn't have to earn his kindness. When I was 16, he died. Heart attack. Sudden. I remember sitting at his funeral feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Jason got his pocket watch, the one I used to wind for him every Sunday. I got a stiff pat on the shoulder from my dad and silence from my mom. There were no stories shared, no invitations to go through his things, no "what would you like to keep?" He vanished, and I was supposed to move on. But I didn't. Not really. At 18, I left home with 2 duffel bags and a partial scholarship. My parents didn't help. Jason dropped out of college in his second year and moved back home. They helped him with rent, co-signed his car loan, let him find himself. I was on my own. I worked nights as a campus janitor, $8 ramen, skipped doctor appointments to avoid co-pays. My mom called me twice that first year, both times to tell me Jason was going through a rough patch. That's how it always was. Over time, I stopped trying to be the good son. I stopped flying home for holidays. My parents stopped pretending to care. Jason still had the golden aura. He'd send me texts like, "Mom says you're being distant, lol," and I'd stare at my screen wondering if he really believed I was the problem. But I had my life, a quiet one. I got into software testing, started therapy, made peace with my history. I wasn't broken, just raised in a house that resented how I felt things they wanted buried. Then, last year, I got a letter. A real one, mailed, thick paper, expensive ink, return address from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was one sentence that changed everything. "You are listed as the sole beneficiary in the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Langston." My grandfather, dead for 7 years. I read the sentence at least 10 times. "You are listed as the sole beneficiary." It didn't make sense. My grandfather had been gone for 7 years. I was there when they buried him. I was there when no one said my name during the funeral speeches. I had assumed, like everyone else, that his will had been sorted quietly, privately, with Jason walking away with whatever family heirlooms were worth salvaging. But apparently, I was wrong. The letter had a contact number for the estate lawyer. I called immediately. My voice shook, my palms were sweating, and I had this nauseating feeling that somehow this was all a mistake, some kind of identity mix-up, a formality that wouldn't mean anything. The lawyer, a calm woman named Erica Dorsey, picked up on the first ring. "Yes," she said. "We've been trying to reach you, for a long time, actually." She sounded surprised I was even calling. I asked her what this was about. She asked if I had a moment to talk. I sat down on the floor with the phone pressed to my ear like it was a lifeline. She explained that my grandfather had written a new will 6 months before he died. It named me, and only me, as the sole inheritor of his personal estate. That included a modest property in upstate New York, some valuable war memorabilia, and a not insignificant bank account. I asked why I was only hearing about this now. She paused. Then she said, "The original notice of probate was sent to your family's home address. The executor at the time said you were unreachable." Unreachable? I hadn't moved. My email hadn't changed. My phone number was the same since college, but they'd told her they couldn't find me? "Who was the executor?" I asked, though I already knew. "Jason." Of course it was Jason. According to Erica, Jason had signed the necessary documents to begin probate, but the process was delayed and eventually paused due to administrative issues. Then, nothing. For 7 years, nothing. I asked if I could get copies of everything. She said yes. I gave her my current address, hung up, and just sat there for a long, long time. I don't remember going to bed that night. I just remember waking up the next morning with this dull, sick feeling behind my eyes, like I'd been hit in the face with something heavy and soft and suffocating. The documents arrived in a thick envelope 3 days later. Inside was everything: the will, signed and notarized. Jason's signature on the executor forms. Notes from Erica requesting follow-ups that were never returned. One line in particular made my blood go cold. Spoke with Jason Langston, informed me Ethan had cut ties and was no longer in contact. No known address, no phone number, no interest in pursuing inheritance. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. And now I had it in writing. They knew. They knew I was supposed to inherit. And they let me rot in silence. I read the sentence at least 10 times. You're listed as the sole beneficiary. It didn't make sense. My grandfather had been gone for 7 years. I was there when they buried him. I was there when no one said my name during the funeral speeches. I had assumed, like everyone else, that his will had been sorted quietly, privately, with Jason walking away with whatever family heirlooms were worth salvaging. But apparently, I was wrong. The letter had a contact number for the estate lawyer. I called immediately. My voice shook, my palms were sweating, and I had this nauseating feeling that somehow this was all a mistake, some kind of identity mix-up, a formality that wouldn't mean anything. The lawyer, a calm woman named Erica Dorsey, picked up on the first ring. Yes, she said, we've been trying to reach you. For a long time, actually. She sounded surprised I was even calling. I asked her what this was about. She asked if I had a moment to talk. I sat down on the floor with the phone pressed to my ear like it was a lifeline. She explained that my grandfather had written a new will 6 months before he died. It named me, and only me, as the sole inheritor of his personal estate. That included a modest property in upstate New York, some valuable war memorabilia, and a not insignificant bank account. I asked why I was only hearing about this now. She paused. Then she said, the original notice of probate was sent to your family's home address. The executor at the time said you were unreachable. Unreachable? I hadn't moved. My email hadn't changed. My phone number was the same since college. But they'd told her they couldn't find me? Who was the executor? I asked, though I already knew. Jason. Of course it was Jason. According to Erica, Jason had signed the necessary documents to begin probate, but the process was delayed and eventually paused due to administrative issues. Then, nothing. For 7 years, nothing. I asked if I could get copies of everything. She said yes. I gave her my current address, hung up, and just sat there for a long, long time. I don't remember going to bed that night. I just remember waking up the next morning with this dull, sick feeling behind my eyes, like I'd been hit in the face with something heavy and soft and suffocating. The documents arrived in a thick envelope 3 days later. Inside was everything: the will, signed and notarized. Jason's signature on the executor forms. Notes from Erica requesting follow-ups that were never returned. One line in particular made my blood go cold. Spoke with Jason Langston, informed me Ethan had cut ties and was no longer in contact. No known address, no phone number, no interest in pursuing inheritance. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. And now I had it in writing. They knew. They knew I was supposed to inherit. And they let me rot in silence. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just showed up. 4 hours on the road back to the town I once swore I'd never return to. It looked exactly the same. Empty, washed out, stuck in time. I parked outside my parents' house, now Jason's house, and immediately noticed the new SUV in the driveway. That's when the pit in my stomach turned solid. I knew exactly where the money had gone. Jason opened the door wearing sweatpants and holding a beer. He squinted at me and asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I handed him the envelope, the will, the bank statements, the lawyer's notes, everything. He took it and asked, "Well, what is this?" I said, "It's what you've been hiding for 7 years." He opened it, scanned the first page, and flipped through the rest. I watched him read. His face didn't show guilt, just fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize your game is over. He muttered, "You weren't supposed to see this." I said, "But I did." "And now you're going to explain." He turned around and walked into the living room like we were about to have a casual conversation. I followed him. He sat on the couch, took a long sip of his beer, and said, "You disappeared, man." "What did you expect?" I kept my voice steady. I said, "I disappeared because this family treated me like a ghost. That doesn't give you the right to lie on legal documents." He shrugged and replied, "Dad didn't want you to have anything." "Neither did Mom. You know that." I said, "I don't care what they wanted. This wasn't theirs. It was Grandpa's decision. And you buried it." He laughed. A nervous, awkward laugh, like he was still hoping this could somehow blow over. "I didn't bury it," he said. "I just put it on hold. Thought maybe you'd come back. We could talk." I cut him off. "You told a lawyer I was unreachable." "Well," he said, "you kind of were. No one knew where you were." I stared at him, then said, "My number hasn't changed since college. You messaged me memes. I was on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You knew how to reach me. You just didn't want to." He didn't answer. He just looked away and shrugged again. I said, "You signed a document stating I was unreachable." "That's perjury, Jason." He answered, "I figured you wouldn't want to deal with it." "Or you figured you could stall until the account closed and the house got seized," I said. "That sound more accurate?" He didn't deny it. I looked around the room. New TV, gaming setup, recliner. I asked, "You already used some of the money, didn't you?" "No," he said, too fast. I pulled out the last document from my jacket pocket. The bank statement, dozens of small withdrawals over years, every one of them from the account marked Arthur Langston, in trust for Ethan Langston. I showed it to him and said, "And this?" "What's this, Jason?" He looked down. No excuse, no denial. I said, "You stole from me. And from him. The only person who ever actually gave a damn about me." He just sat there, frozen, silent. For the first time in our lives, Jason had nothing to say. I looked at him one last time and said, "This isn't just between us anymore. Now it's between you and the law." And I walked out. The day after I confronted Jason, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there in over 5 years. Not since my mother told me she didn't recognize who I'd become, because I dared to call out Jason's behavior at a family dinner. The house looked the same. Beige siding, trimmed hedges, that same brass eagle above the garage that Dad polished every spring like it made us part of something noble. I rang the doorbell. I didn't text ahead. I wasn't giving anyone a chance to rehearse their answers. My mother opened the door. She blinked, surprised, but not completely. "Ethan," she said, flat. "We weren't expecting you." I stepped inside without waiting. I said, "We need to talk." She called out for my dad. He came down the stairs slowly, like he already knew why I was there. I dropped the envelope onto the kitchen table. The same documents I'd given Jason, the will, the executor forms, the bank statement. But this time, I included a handwritten note from the lawyer, the part that stated, "Family reported Ethan as unreachable." My father didn't sit. He looked at the papers, then at me. I said, "I know everything now." Neither of them moved. I said, "Grandpa left everything to me." "You knew that. You helped Jason cover it up." My mother finally said something. "We didn't cover anything up. We just weren't sure what Arthur meant." I stared at her. "You weren't sure what he meant," I repeated. "He wrote a legal will. Signed. Notarized. He named me. Only me. What exactly was unclear?" She avoided eye contact. My father spoke next. "He was old. He probably wasn't thinking straight." I said, "He was sharper at 82 than either of you are now." My voice was calm. Too calm. I was the only one who visited him, every Sunday. I fixed his porch when it started sinking. I picked up his meds when you said you were too busy. I was the one who sat with him when he cried over Grandma, not you, not Jason. My mother crossed her arms. She said, "You always did think you were some kind of martyr?" I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. I said, "No. I just thought maybe for once, I wasn't invisible." I turned to my father. "You signed that letter, didn't you? The one saying you didn't know where I was?" He didn't answer, just looked down. I pressed, "You all decided I didn't deserve it. That Jason needed it more. That I wouldn't fight back." Still silence. So I said what needed to be said. "You didn't lose a son. You gave one up. You made that choice long before Grandpa died." My mother's face tensed. My father said nothing. I said, "You're going to pay it back, every cent. And then you're going to explain to the lawyer how you lied to delay probate." My mother snapped, "You can't just barge in here and make demands." "I can," I said, "because this wasn't yours to take. It was mine. And you knew it." She looked ready to throw something. My father grabbed her arm and whispered something I didn't hear. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused and said, "The only reason I'm not pressing charges today is because Grandpa would have hated that. But I'm not letting this go. Not ever again." And I walked out. Again. But this time, I didn't feel like a son leaving his parents' house. I felt like I was leaving strangers behind. I gave them 2 weeks. 14 days to return what they had no right to touch. 14 days to come clean, to at least pretend like they regretted what they'd done. They didn't. Jason didn't call. My parents didn't reply to the follow-up letter my lawyer sent. Not even a denial. Just silence. The kind of silence they always used as a weapon. Cold, detached, manipulative. As if ignoring me long enough might make me disappear again. Only this time, I didn't disappear. I hired a lawyer, not someone cheap, and not one of those lawyers who try to keep the peace and sweep things under the rug. Her name was Lorraine Grant, mid-50s, sharp eyes, no small talk. She specialized in real estate and probate law, and she had a reputation for winning. I gave her everything. The will, the bank records, the notarized documents, even the lawyer notes from 7 years ago. She studied it carefully, then looked up and said, "They didn't just mishandle this. They committed fraud." Within a week, she filed a formal complaint in probate court. We petitioned to reinstate the will, replace Jason as executor with a court-appointed neutral, and freeze the remaining assets. She also sent a demand letter to Jason for a full accounting of the money he had already taken. The bank froze the trust account. 3 days later, Jason texted me. He said, "Can we talk?" "Just the two of us." I didn't respond. A few hours later, he sent me a voice message. His voice was shaky, rushed. He said, "Look, I didn't mean for it to go this far, okay? I thought you didn't care. I thought you'd never come back. Don't ruin everything over this." I forwarded the message to Lorraine. She replied, "Don't respond. He's trying to guilt you into dropping it. Let the process do its job." And for the first time in my life, someone stood up between me and their damage. Someone said, "You don't have to handle this alone." It felt like breathing again, but the fallout wasn't over. A week after the court filing, I got a letter in the mail. Real paper. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. She wrote that she was sorry things had escalated, and that she wished we could settle this quietly. She said she didn't realize there had been a misunderstanding, and she hoped I would reconsider dragging the family name into court. She never used the word lie, never admitted what they'd done. I read it 3 times, then I burned it. This wasn't revenge, this was repair. They spent years telling me I was too sensitive, but now I was just clear, and clarity, especially when backed by law, hurts more than any outburst ever could. The first court hearing was set for mid-June. I flew back into town the day before, carrying nothing but a garment bag and a folder. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't post about it. I just showed up, not to win an argument, but to finish a chapter. The courthouse was small, familiar in the worst way. I'd walked past it 100 times growing up, never thinking I'd one day step inside to fight for what should have been mine all along. Lorraine met me on the front steps. She was calm, unshaken. She said, "They'll try to make this emotional. Don't let them. The facts are on your side." I nodded, but I could already feel it. The weight in my chest, the old muscle memory of shrinking around them. It came back like smoke in old fabric. I took a breath and followed her in. Inside, Jason was already there. He wore a suit that didn't fit and eyes that couldn't meet mine. My parents sat behind him, not on my side of the room, not even in neutral territory, behind him, still choosing him, still pretending they didn't already know everything. The hearing wasn't long. Lorraine laid everything out with brutal precision. The will, dated and notarized, my grandfather's instructions, the records of Jason's withdrawals, the communication logs proving they had my contact information. She finished with the final point, the most damning one. She said, "The family presented Mr. Langston as unreachable, despite ample evidence to the contrary. That misrepresentation delayed probate for over 7 years, during which the named executor, Mr. Jason Langston, used the trust account for personal expenses. This is not a misunderstanding. It's deliberate fraud." Jason's lawyer tried to spin it. He said, Jason was under the impression that Ethan had cut ties. The family was grieving. It was a confusing time. I couldn't help myself. I turned to Jason and said, "You sent me dog videos 6 months after Grandpa died. You knew where I was. You knew how to reach me." Jason didn't look up. My father crossed his arms. My mother just stared at the table like it might disappear if she looked long enough. The judge asked Jason to speak directly. He mumbled something about regret, confusion, not understanding the legal process. The judge didn't even blink. In the end, the ruling was clear. Jason was removed as executor. The court appointed a third-party trustee. Jason was ordered to repay every cent he'd taken, with interest, and the court ruled that any attempt to block the inheritance moving forward would be considered obstruction. Lorraine said later that it was one of the cleanest wins she'd ever had. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. I stepped outside the courthouse into the sunlight. It hit me like heat on a bruise. Warm, but tender. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought you wouldn't want to be involved. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a while. Then I replied. I said, "You didn't lose me. You erased me. And now you have to live with the silence you created." I hit send, turned off my phone, and walked away. Not just from the building, from all of it. After the ruling, things moved quickly. The new executor sorted out the final paperwork in less than 2 months. The property in upstate New York was legally transferred to me. The bank account, after Jason's repayment and penalties, was restored almost entirely. The war memorabilia was appraised and preserved. Some of it went to a museum, some I kept. But I didn't blow through the money. I wasn't raised that way, even if they always saw me as weak. I spoke to a financial advisor, built a long-term plan. Part of the money went into a trust of my own, one that could support my future family, or any causes I cared about later in life. Another portion went into investments, sustainable ones, carefully chosen. I bought a small home in Oregon surrounded by trees and silence, and finally left the city where I spent too many years trying to prove my worth. I didn't become rich overnight. I became free. That freedom didn't go unnoticed. About 6 months after the court ruling, I got an email from Jason. Short, blunt. "I know we haven't talked, but I'm going through some things. Could use some help. Don't have a lot of options." I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, a message from my mother. "Your father had to sell part of the company. Finances are tighter than expected. Just thought you should know." 3 days after that, a message from my father. "Hope you're doing okay. We're managing, but things are different now. If you ever feel like reconnecting..." I didn't answer any of them. Not because I'm cruel, but because I finally understand the value of peace. And I won't trade it again for people who only remember I exist when they need something. It's ironic. The son they once said was too emotional now has the calm they never found. The one they called too soft turned out to be the one who survived. I'm 30 now. I work remotely. I spend my mornings hiking, my afternoons reading or building models. I have a dog named Finch, and he thinks I hung the moon. Some nights, I still hear their words in my head, the ones they used to say, "You're too sensitive. You're difficult. You take everything so personally." But now I hear them differently, because maybe being sensitive isn't the problem. Maybe the problem was being surrounded by people too numb to feel anything at all. And the truth is, I didn't lose a family, I escaped one.